On a freezing, rain-slicked night in November 1997, in the coastal Navy town of Norfolk, Virginia, 24-year-old Michelle Moore sat in her modest apartment, waiting for her husband to return from his naval deployment. The wind blew hard off the Atlantic Ocean, rattling the aluminum window frames of the housing complex. Inside, her 18-month-old toddler was fast asleep in the adjacent nursery. It was a peaceful, mundane evening in a working-class neighborhood where young military families lived side by side. But as midnight approached, the peaceful silence was shattered by a subtle, sinister intrusion. Someone bypassed the lock on the front door, slipping through the shadows without making a sound. Hours later, when Michelle failed to answer her morning phone calls, a concerned neighbor used a spare key to open the front door. The apartment was icy cold, the front door was unlocked, and inside the master bedroom, a scene of incomprehensible brutality awaited. Michelle Moore had been violently assaulted and murdered in her bed, while her toddler remained unharmed in the next room, crying softly in the dark. The horrific crime sent shockwaves through the naval base and the surrounding town of Norfolk. Within minutes of the emergency call, police cruisers, forensic units, and homicide detectives swarmed the complex. Red and blue emergency lights flashed across the wet asphalt, drawing crowds of terrified neighbors onto their porches. The town felt paralyzed with fear. A murderer was on the loose, and the local news media immediately began broadcasting live updates, demanding answers from the police department. The pressure on the Norfolk Police Department was instantaneous and suffocating. The city's reputation was on the line, the Navy was demanding justice for one of their own families, and lead detectives were told by their superiors to deliver a suspect before the weekly news cycle ended. Instead of meticulously gathering forensic evidence and waiting for biological analysis, lead detectives focused their attention on a young man named Danielle Williams. Danielle was a quiet, 22-year-old Navy veteran who lived in the same apartment complex. He was known throughout the neighborhood as a gentle, soft-spoken individual who kept to himself. Danielle had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no connection to Michelle other than being a neighbor who had occasionally said hello in the hallway. However, to the pressure-ridden detectives, Danielle represented a quick, convenient suspect who lacked the financial resources to mount a fierce legal defense. On the evening following the murder, detectives knocked on Danielle's door and asked him to come down to the station voluntarily to clear a few minor details. Naive, trusting of law enforcement, and eager to help solve the murder of his neighbor, Danielle stepped into the back of the police cruiser without hesitation. He did not call a lawyer, nor did he notify his family. He believed that because he had done nothing wrong, the truth would protect him. He had no way of knowing that he was stepping directly into a psychological trap carefully engineered to destroy his life. Inside a cramped, windowless interrogation room, under the buzzing glare of fluorescent lights, the tone shifted instantly. The friendly demeanor of the detectives vanished. For the next 11 hours, without a lawyer present, without food, and deprived of sleep, Danielle was subjected to aggressive, high-pressure interrogation tactics. Detectives lied to him, claiming they had his fingerprints at the scene, claiming eyewitnesses saw him enter Michelle's apartment, and telling him that if he just admitted to a minor role, he could go home to his family. Exhausted, psychologically broken, and confused, Danielle eventually yielded to their demands. He signed a typed statement prepared by the detectives, a statement that detailed a crime he had never committed. When Danielle Williams' trial began in the Norfolk Circuit Court in 1998, he stood before the judge as a young man whose life had already been judged in the press. The prosecution's entire case rested almost exclusively on the signed confession obtained during that grueling 11-hour interrogation. The prosecutor painted Danielle as a cold-blooded predator who hid his dark desires behind a quiet, unassuming demeanor. They presented the signed statement as ironclad, undeniable proof of guilt, telling the jury that no innocent person would ever sign a confession to a murder they did not commit. However, beneath the surface of the prosecution's narrative lay glaring, irreconcilable contradictions that should have dismantled the case entirely. When state forensic laboratories completed their initial analysis of the crime scene evidence, the results were astonishing. DNA recovered from the victim's body belonged to a single, unidentified male, and it did not match Danielle Williams. There were no fingerprints belonging to Danielle inside the apartment, no bloodstains on his clothing, and no physical evidence linking him to the room where Michelle was killed. Forensic science unequivocally declared that Danielle was not the man who had left biological evidence at the scene. Instead of dismissing the charges in the face of absolute scientific contradiction, the prosecution doubled down on their theory. Rather than admitting that the signed confession was a tragic mistake, the prosecutor invented an extraordinary and proven scenario. They argued to the court that Danielle could not have committed the crime alone. They claimed that Danielle must have brought an accomplice, an unknown second attacker whose DNA was left at the scene, while Danielle held the victim down. To support this new, wild theory, police arrested a second young man, Joseph Dick, an acquaintance of Danielle who was also intellectually vulnerable. Under similar high-pressure interrogation techniques, Joseph was coerced into signing a second confession that mirrored Danielle's forced statement. Danielle's court-appointed defense attorney was severely underfunded and unprepared to handle a high-stakes capital murder trial. He failed to call expert witnesses in police interrogation tactics who could explain the psychological phenomenon of false confessions to the jury. He failed to aggressively highlight the complete absence of physical evidence connecting Danielle to the scene. The trial devolved into an emotional spectacle, where the horrific nature of the crime and the dramatic reading of the coerced confession overshadowed the objective, scientific reality of the DNA evidence. After brief deliberations, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Danielle Williams was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Joseph Dick received a similar crushing sentence. As the judge's gavel struck the wooden bench, Danielle was led away in heavy iron shackles. At 23 years old, an innocent man was stripped of his freedom and condemned to spend the rest of his natural life behind the walls of a maximum security state penitentiary. Danielle Williams was transported to the Keene Mountain Correctional Center, a high-security state prison nestled deep in the rugged mountains of Virginia. Keene Mountain was a terrifying world governed by brutal violence, prison gangs, and unyielding institutional hostility. The concrete walls echoed with the slamming of steel doors, shouting guards, and the constant threat of explosive conflicts among inmates. For a soft-spoken young veteran who had never engaged in crime, adapting to life inside a maximum security prison was a matter of sheer daily survival. In maximum security facilities, wrongfully convicted individuals face an agonizing mental crossroads. Many succumb to deep despair, losing their sanity or giving up on life entirely under the weight of an unjust sentence. Others become consumed by anger and bitterness, allowing the toxic environment to corrupt their character. Danielle made a conscious decision to choose a third path. He resolved that he would maintain his dignity, keep a clean disciplinary record, and spend every available moment fighting to prove his innocence from behind bars. Every single day, as soon as the library opened, Danielle sat at a small wooden desk in the prison's law center. Under the dim overhead lights, he spent hours poring over legal volumes, studying post-conviction statutes, appellate procedures, and constitutional law. Using an old mechanical typewriter, he wrote hundreds of letters to civil rights organizations, legal defense funds, investigative journalists, and innocence projects across the country. He meticulously explained the contradictions in his case, the false confession, the absence of physical evidence, and the foreign DNA profile that proved another man was responsible. For years, the response from the outside world was a wall of cold rejections. Bureaucratic stamps declared that his case did not meet the criteria for review, or that all legal avenues had been exhausted. Yet, outside the prison walls, Danielle's family refused to abandon him. His mother sold her possessions, took out loans, and tirelessly campaigned to bring attention to her son's plight. She attended rallies, spoke to local reporters, and kept her son's name alive in the public consciousness, refusing to let the state quietly bury an innocent man. By the early 2000s, as years stretched into a decade, Danielle's case caught the attention of a group of dedicated attorneys associated with the Innocence Project. Recognizing the classic hallmarks of a coerced confession and an egregious failure to heed forensic DNA evidence, the legal team agreed to take on Danielle's case pro bono. They realized that to free Danielle, they would not only have to challenge the original conviction in court, but also find the unidentified man whose DNA had been left at the crime scene decades earlier. By 2015, Danielle Williams had spent nearly 2 decades inside state prison. His youth had vanished, his health was declining, and the world outside had transformed dramatically. Yet, the field of forensic science had undergone an even more revolutionary evolution. High-sensitivity DNA analysis and advanced genetic genealogy were beginning to solve cold cases that had remained cold for decades. Microscopic samples of biological material, samples that were far too small to test in the late 1990s, could now be fully sequenced to generate complete genomic profiles. Danielle's legal team filed formal motions requesting that all remaining physical evidence from the 1997 crime scene be re-examined using modern forensic technology. After a protracted legal battle with state prosecutors who resisted reopening the case, a judge finally granted permission for independent laboratory testing. Technicians extracted biological material from the victim's clothing and generated a crisp, complete single-source male DNA profile. When this profile was run through CODIS, the National FBI database, it returned no immediate matches, indicating that the perpetrator had never been convicted of a felony that required a mandatory DNA submission. The legal team faced a daunting roadblock. They possessed the exact genetic blueprint of Michelle Moore's killer, but without a name attached to the profile, the state remained unwilling to vacate Danielle's conviction. Refusing to accept defeat, the legal team partnered with a pioneer in the field of investigative genetic genealogy. The genealogist took the raw digital DNA data and uploaded it to public genealogical databases, such as GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, where millions of ordinary citizens had submitted their DNA for ancestry research. Within days, the complex algorithm identified distant genetic relatives, third and fourth cousins who shared distinct segments of DNA with the unknown crime scene profile. The genealogist began constructing a massive, intricate family tree, working backward through birth certificates, marriage licenses, census records, and public archives to trace the common ancestors of those distant relatives. After months of exhaustive genealogical mapping, the massive family tree began to converge on a single branch, a family that had lived in Norfolk, Virginia, in November 1997. The research pointed directly toward a specific individual, a man named Omar Ballard. When investigators began researching Omar Ballard, the revelations were terrifying. In 1997, at the time of Michelle Moore's murder, Omar Ballard lived just 3 streets away from the victim's apartment complex. He was a violent, impulsive individual with a documented history of stalking, home invasions, and violent sexual assaults against women in the local area, a criminal profile that matched the crime scene with chilling accuracy. Even more shocking was the realization that local law enforcement had briefly questioned Ballard regarding other regional offenses shortly after the 1997 murder, yet they had never cross-referenced his name or location with the Michelle Moore investigation. Because police were fully focused on securing Danielle Williams' coerced confession, they had ignored the violent predator operating in the immediate neighborhood. Equipped with this breakthrough information, private investigators hired by the defense tracked Omar Ballard's current location. They discreetly monitored his movements until they managed to obtain a discarded item containing his biological material, a plastic cup thrown into a public trash receptacle. The sample was rushed under a strict chain of custody to an accredited forensic laboratory. Scientists extracted the DNA from the cup and ran a comparative analysis against the 1997 crime scene profile. The lab results were absolute, definitive, and indisputable. The DNA recovered from Michelle Moore's body matched Omar Ballard with a statistical probability of 1 in several billion. Furthermore, when confronted by law enforcement with the undeniable scientific evidence, Omar Ballard eventually admitted to the crime, providing intimate details about the apartment layout and the break-in that only the true perpetrator could have known. He explicitly confirmed that he had acted entirely alone, and that he had never met or seen Danielle Williams or Joseph Dick in his life. The truth was finally laid bare before the world. The state had locked up 2 innocent men based on forced confessions, while allowing a dangerous predator to roam free for nearly 2 decades. With Omar Ballard's full confession and the matching DNA results certified by state forensic authorities, Danielle Williams' legal team filed an emergency petition for an evidentiary hearing in the Circuit Court of Norfolk. They demanded the immediate dismissal of all charges and the total exoneration of both Danielle and Joseph Dick. However, the legal battle was far from over. Rather than swiftly acknowledging the horrific error and issuing an immediate apology, state prosecutors and city officials engaged in a prolonged effort to protect the department's reputation. They raised procedural objections, questioned the timing of the petitions, and attempted to minimize the impact of the new evidence. The outrage from the public and media became overwhelming. Major news organizations broadcasted prime-time investigative reports detailing the case. The story made national headlines. 2 innocent men spent 20 years in prison, while police ignored DNA that pointed to a local serial killer. Public protests erupted outside the courthouse, and legal scholars across the country condemned the state's reluctance to correct a proven injustice. Under immense public pressure, the governor of Virginia intervened, reviewing the complete investigative record, the genetic genealogy findings, and Omar Ballard's confession. On a historic afternoon in 2018, the governor granted absolute pardons to Danielle Williams and Joseph Dick based on absolute innocence. The state court officially vacated all convictions, expunged their criminal records, and ordered their immediate, permanent release from state custody. Inside the courtroom, as the judge formally signed the exoneration documents, the gallery broke into cheers and tears. Two prison guards stepped forward and unlocked Danielle's handcuffs for the final time. After 20 years of living in the shadow of a crime he did not commit, Danielle raised his hands, looked at his bare wrists, and took a deep breath as a completely free man. Danielle Williams stepped out onto the courthouse steps into the bright afternoon sunlight, his first moments of complete freedom in 2 decades. He fell into the arms of his mother, weeping tears of relief as family members, supporters, and legal team members embraced him. The heavy doors of the judicial system had finally opened, bringing an end to a nightmare that had stolen his entire youth. Following his exoneration, Danielle was awarded financial compensation by the state of Virginia for his wrongful imprisonment. However, as Danielle has stated in public interviews, no amount of monetary compensation can ever replace the 20 years taken from him. It cannot return his 20s and 30s, erase the trauma of maximum security prison, or give back the lost moments with his family. Omar Ballard was formally charged, prosecuted, and sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Michelle Moore, ensuring that the true perpetrator would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Danielle turned his painful experience into a force for positive change. He became an active voice in criminal justice reform, working alongside organizations like the Innocence Project to advocate for mandatory electronic recording of all police interrogations. His case served as a key catalyst for legislative changes in Virginia, ensuring that law enforcement officers are required to record interrogations from start to finish to prevent the use of coercive tactics. The story of Danielle Williams remains a stark reminder of the dangers of confirmation bias, false confessions, and institutional stubbornness within the justice system. But above all, it stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of modern forensic science, and the unyielding pursuit of truth that can shatter even the heaviest iron bars.